just got blacked out. Hate to break up the reunion back there. That's a good thing. All right, everybody, as we get settled, I did not look to see who's got our opening prayer. Aaron, would you go ahead and do that here in about 10 seconds when everybody's sitting down?
Countdown or just go?
I was just trying to be nice.
Father, but we're so thankful for the opportunity we have to gather together midweek to study your word and to look at the foundational principles of our faith. Father, help us to appreciate the resurrection of Jesus and what it means to us. Help us to learn much from it. Help us to appreciate the great joy that it gives us, the great hope that it gives us. Father, help us to use that joy and hope to encourage others to see that there's more beyond this life, there's more beyond this world, and that there's a great eternity awaiting those that are faithful. Father, bless all that teach your word, bless all that study to learn more of you, and bless your children everywhere. Watch over us always. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, is everybody excited to talk about this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs to the side? Yeah? Okay. All right, so we are still on this sheet. Fact number 1, Jesus is real. And just as a little bit of a recap, we are doing a class on the resurrection of Jesus. And we introduced for a couple weeks sort of our approach and the importance of the resurrection. And now we're getting into really the positive material or the facts, the central facts undergirding the resurrection, I guess you could say. And what we're doing is we're going through material that everyone would agree on, regardless of their faith commitments or lack thereof, if they have studied the subject. These are things that are universally agreed upon. And we're taking this from what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, and specifically verses 3 through 5 right now. I'll go ahead and read that real quick so we remember. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12, and he goes on to list more of the appearances. And we spent some time digging through and pointing out how this is what Paul says is the gospel by which they were saved, that he preached to them. And that when we examine this, this is some of the earliest material that we have in the New Testament as far as recording what the early disciples were saying. And so fact number 1, Jesus is real, something that a lot of us probably take for granted. And I think more and more there's becoming sort of a question about it in popular media, things like that. And so we talked about the importance of this because if Jesus wasn't a real person, then there's no point in talking about the resurrection. And so we talked about the distinction between something having happened and having record that it happened. And then we started digging into these ancient written sources, some of the most important ones that mentioned Jesus. And so we looked at Josephus and a couple of the quotations there. And this is where we ended on Sunday. It was this one later, which we said seems to be describing the martyrdom of James, the apostle, the brother of Jesus. And that this was what was going on. Make sure I have the right one up. Yep. That there's a lot of familiar names like Festus and the Sanhedrin and maybe Ananus. And again, I forgot to look up which guy that was talking about. And that everything that Josephus says, is it similar, different to what we find in the New Testament? Yeah, it's essentially the same thing. I mean, just from a different standpoint. So before we move on to Tacitus on page 3, do we have any lingering, burning questions that we want to ask about the material so far? intro, things pertaining to Josephus. Brace.
I didn't really have a question, but you were talking about Ananias. I did look him up,
Oh, good.
and there's some debate about which one it is. It's possible that it's his son,
Yeah.
Ananias, Ben Ananias. So, but he lived until 68 AD. So I mean, potentially he could be the same one,
Yeah, it could be.
depending on how old the one in John was at the time. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was walking to the kitchen about dinner time and I thought to myself, there was something I was supposed to look up for tonight and I didn't do it. So thank you for that. Okay, if there's nothing else, then we're going to move to page 3 and talk about Tacitus. The plan is that I assume we will finish this packet tonight. There's a chance that we won't, depending on how eager we are all to talk about these things. And originally I said I was going to give you the next packet tonight. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give it to you on Sunday. If we don't finish this, we'll finish it up then. If we do, we're just going to talk about some introductory things that you don't need to prepare for. So nothing new to pick up tonight. Okay, so we're going to look at Tacitus now. And so as I said, Josephus, Tacitus, these are usually two of the most important sources talking about Jesus outside of the Bible. Cornelius Tacitus, he was a historian, a politician. He's one of the prime sources for the history of the Roman Empire. And so he's one of the people that gets consulted on that. And as we say here, he lived from about 56 to 118, something like that. So he was in the latter part of the first century. He did not like Christians at all. When you read his writings, he thought they were an abomination, a nuisance, as did a lot of the empire at that point. Can I get a volunteer to read this quotation from Tacitus? Ashley.
Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. So a little bit of context here. At this point in time, and this is the early 60s, a fire breaks out in Rome, and it's sort of a conspiracy, and there starts to be this conspiracy made that, oh, it was an inside job and the government did it, essentially. And so Nero catches wind of that, and you got to find somebody to blame. I don't remember if they decided what actually happened or not. But essentially, to get rid of this conspiracy report, he says, oh, the Christians did it. You know, these people that we all hate. They're the ones that are responsible. And we have all of that information there. Let's see. As we did last time, I didn't ask this specific question, but what names or terms sound familiar to you in what Tacitus says here? Addie, you looked at me and smiled, so there you go. All right, yeah. Is Tiberius sound familiar to anyone?
Luke writes about it, doesn't he?
I think so. Yeah, Tiberius was the Roman emperor at the time Jesus died. And so he's another one. And so we got a lot of time markers here that Tacitus is getting. It's during Tiberius. It's during the governorship of Pontius Pilate in Judea. All of these things happen. And number one here, what does Tacitus say happened to Christus, or Crestus, depending on the version? And that, everyone agrees, is Christ. What happened to Christ during the reign of Tiberius Caesar? Okay, he was crucified. Where do you get the idea that he was crucified? You're right, but...
Execute the tortures on the class
Yeah, the extreme penalty, that is what some of the, I would say, more sophisticated people of the day would call it. As you kind of look through and look at quotations of people talking about crucifixion, they didn't actually like to address it because it was so horrendous. And so, yes, saying that this Christus suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius means that this person was crucified. That was the highest form of capital punishment. They would have thought, beheading was much more civilized, and so that was reserved for citizens, and then the extreme penalty was reserved for the poorest and the slaves and the rebels and things like that. Okay, and what was the result? So this Christus suffers the extreme penalty, and then what happens? Somebody on this side. Your side, over here. You weren't looking at me. Any volunteers? Gavin, what do you think happened? What was the result after the extreme penalty? It's in that last couple of sentences there. Or you can pass to Jeff if you want to.
Dispersion?
Say what?
The dispersion?
I think one of them here, this would have been like a Christian dispersion, sort of. But, so if you look at these last couple of sentences, does anybody else want to offer their answer? What was the result after this execution? Great.
Mischievous superstition broke out. That word superstition is not exactly the word we use it.
Yeah.
That's a reference to a religious practice. That's what the super refers to. So we think of ghost stories and that. They were talking about a most mischievous superstition, meaning it was hideous, it was excessive, irrational, or deviant, according to the Roman first century usage I found. And so it wasn't a kind
No.
description of Christianity.
Right. And so, yeah, you said it broke out, this mischievous superstition. What did they think had happened? That very next phrase.
They thought they contained it.
Right. You thought, okay, well, you cut the head off the snake, right? And then the whole thing dies, as the saying goes. And so they thought, we'll get rid of this guy, and it'll be checked for the moment. But then it spreads. It broke out not only there in Judea, where it first started, the first source of the evil, but even also it popped up here in Rome. And then he talks about how, everything horrible is in Rome. It might be the way like people talk about New York City or something, all the TV shows and different things that you have about what goes on in New York. How does this compare to, let's first say, how does this compare to the information that Josephus gives?
It's more negative.
Yeah, he's definitely less neutral, that's for sure.
And when you describe this most mischievous superstition, do you think that was, do you think there's a possibility that they're referring to the resurrection?
I think the whole package. I'm sure he had heard of the resurrection. He, of course, doesn't mention it directly, but I think he's talking about the package of the Christian faith. Ashley, what?
So I would agree that this is more negative, but when you look at the adjectives of both Josephus and this guy, Tacitus, they're very different. Josephus has a lot of positive adjectives, like a wise man, surprising feats, all this. And so Bryce and I were talking about this, and, they're both historians, but I wonder, I know that you're not supposed to interject your own feelings into history, but I wonder how much of their own feelings got into their reports.
In the
Or
ancient,
what they heard.
in the ancient world, a lot, which is part of the task of ancient historians to try to weed through that, right? And then things like peer review came along, where you can't just say whatever you want, or all of your peers are going to tear you apart. And so you get these kinds of things where Pilate is saying this thing is horrible, mischievous superstition, you should not like this at all. But when you look at it, it's the same facts that Josephus said. I mean, with a little bit different twist and a different perspective here. But yeah, there is definitely more of his own kind of personal spin on things, even though he does somewhat in a straightforward way present the information. Bryce.
I'm approaching this as a biased reader, of course, and you're right, he doesn't mention the resurrection, but it is interesting when you read all that he says, that it at least implies some momentous event that took place that changed the direction of the course this movement was going. We thought we had stopped it, and it seemed to be checked for a moment, and then all of a sudden it broke out again, and not only in Judea where it started, but it's spread everywhere, even all the way to Rome. And so, I mean, obviously, we can read that from our perspective of having more of the details and a different perspective, perhaps, and look at that and think, well, we know what the major event was that turned the tide. And so, I mean, even that fits with what we read in the New Testament. I mean, the disciples after Jesus' death are fleeing, and they're hiding, and then later they're dying for their faith. And so, yeah, something happened. We know what it was.
That's the thing is, you kind of read between the lines, and it's, something happened here. And it's also, I think, parallel to, to what Josephus said in that first quotation that we looked at, where he says, had condemned him to be crucified, Jesus, who's called Christ. And those who had in the first place come to love him did not give up their affection for him, and the tribe of Christians so called after him is still to this day not disappeared. And it's really the same thing of, okay, we thought we stamped it out, and then it actually got worse. And then there's this big question mark in the middle of what happened. And so, as we're saying, all the basic information is still here. So there's some people that argue, even if we didn't have the Bible, if we just had things like this and maybe some of the things with the early church fathers, we'd still have all the information about the gospel. And I think that's very suggestive. Let's see, what's the significance, number 3 on page 3 here. What is the significance of testimony from a person like Tacitus about these events?
He talks about what we believe in despite thinking it was annoying and stupid.
Right, and so what's important about that?
It's not only the people that believe and approve of this message or the Jews, and you can see that Josephus is more on the Jew side because he came from the Jews. So of course he's going to side with them, but this guy,
You can call him Cornelius if that's easier too.
yeah, I like that name better. Cornelius, he is against this, but he still reports the exact same data that we knew to be true from the people that supported it.
Right. And so you're getting the testimony, enemy testimony, that is corroborating your story. And that's huge. I mean, you have something like that in court, expert testimony of somebody who seems to be opposed to you but actually corroborates your case. That's huge. And that's one of the reasons that we're pointing these things out. We not only have an aristocratic Jew, but we also have, a prominent Roman as well, saying that this is everything that happened, and what they're saying happened is the same thing that the New Testament says. Thought I saw some hands up. Nope. Okay. So then, just referencing number 4 here at the bottom of the page, comparing what is said to Josephus and Tacitus to what Paul says specifically in 1 Corinthians 15, what's similar, or is there anything notably different between what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that we've been looking at and what we see in these quotations?
The interesting to me was the mention of resurrection in Corinthians and not in these, unless it's the mysterious event.
Yeah, I mean, from my biased perspective, yeah, what Tacitus and Josephus leave out as the missing link, Paul states explicitly as the resurrection. And that's what I think we're arguing, of course, is the explanation for all these events. So there's the mention of the resurrection is for sure different, but is there any other notable differences, Addie?
Differences
Or similarities, whichever you want to talk about.
so his appearance to the 500, people and all those who he appeared to after
Mm-hmm.
would coincide with, this broke out again, not only in Judea but all these other places. I guess that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. The proof of the resurrection, yeah, caused all of these things to happen. Great.
I think it's important that both of these historians refer to this as a religious movement instead of a political movement.
Yeah.
And the irony of that is the early followers of Jesus thought it was a political movement, and it became a religious movement. And and those that tend to measure history more in the context of political function than they do religious function recognize it as a religious movement that has a life of its own beyond the political impact that they're having in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can't really overestimate the fact that when, especially the Romans are looking at this kind of stuff happened every generation. Jesus was not the first Jewish Messiah figure to pop up, and he wasn't the last either. But the rest of them, they would kill the main guy, and then his followers would disappear into the woods or to the caves or whatever, never to be heard of again. And this one they're mentioning is notably different because they kill the Messiah figure, but it doesn't stop. Instead, it expands and grows very aggressively. And so there's something different about this. Why are we still talking about this Jewish Messiah 2,000 years later? Because can you name any of the other ones that popped up? No, because it was stamped out and forgotten. So they're all noting that there was something different about this one. Anything else that we want to note? Or maybe even something that surprised you about what these guys have said? No. So this is making total sense. Everybody's flowing here, right? No questions. It's all very obvious.
One thing maybe is I remember reading before about there's a principle called I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's essentially that often when we look at history and historians, especially when it's written about their own events or their own time, there is a strong bias to not write a history that portrays yourself in a negative light. And the fact that we have a portrayal of Christianity, both from maybe a somewhat more neutral perspective from Josephus, he's trying to be maybe a little more just reporting on the facts, and you have this probably very editorial opinion of
That guy.
I lost it. But the fact that you have both and the core facts, you can see them being the same even though they're being viewed from different points of view. And the fact that the apostolic account reports the bad along with the good. They report the fact that they scattered when Jesus was arrested. They report the fact that they were dismayed and they didn't believe when they thought it was all over. Kind of lends credibility to no one is adding or embellishing information here. Aside from Tacitus perhaps calling it shameful and hideous and disgusting, and he's showing his Roman elitism a little bit.
Yeah, he was very sophisticated and
He
better
doesn't
than
seem to like
everyone.
Rome all that much either, so he's just kind of a grumpy guy.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is extremely important, and it's usually called the criterion of embarrassment. And we're actually going to talk a lot about that in the coming facts. If you want to make your case, you're not going to put in the facts that embarrass you or take away from your case. So just off the cuff things of the disciples not believing in Jesus and then all running away when he's arrested, is very embarrassing to Christianity if you're trying to make a case for Christianity. Or in their day and age, the testimony of women was also embarrassing. But the Gospels are all unanimous. The first witnesses to the resurrection were women. The last ones at the cross were women. The ones to see where he was buried were women. And that's not something that you would want to put in that day and age if you're trying to sell Christianity. And so those kind of things are really important. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about those in coming weeks. So thanks to Andrew for bringing that up there. And I'm turning the page, and we're about to leave these two guys in the dust if there's nothing else. Okay. If you're feeling really motivated, at the top of 4, I put some other, it's not all of them, but some other important quotations. You know, if you're not doing anything one night and you decide, hey, I want to look at this. But now we're going to move to archaeology. And so we've looked at ancient history and quotations, and we've seen it's pretty unanimous as far as the written record goes, that there was this man Jesus who was a Messiah figure among the Jews, and he was executed specifically under Pontius Pilate during the time of Tiberius. And after his execution, his followers still followed him, and it actually grew. But history and archaeology they're different. They're like, I don't know if you want to say cousins or sisters or what. They're distinct, but they kind of supplement each other. And so archaeology is like, what objects or what can we touch and feel? What can we see about the land, or what sort of artifacts can we bring up? And this is just another way of going at it. And so I want to talk about some of the important archaeological finds that bear on the story of Jesus. And these are just two of, I think, the important ones. And there's, of course, other controversial ones and things like that, but we're going to talk about these. I didn't realize I went back. Okay. So this is a color of what you have on your page, but just for you to get it. So this is known as the Pontius Pilate inscription. And this was found in Caesarea on the coast of Palestine. And it's essentially, it reads something to the effect of Pontius Pilate prefect dedicates this building to, I think it's Tiberius Caesar, and it's a political thing of, look how amazing, Pilate is in dedicating this structure to the great and grand emperor sort of deal. But it names Pontius Pilate specifically prefect of Judea. And there's a good amount known about Pilate historically, but this is tangible, physical evidence of, yeah, this guy existed in time and space and in reality here. Here's this rock that has his name on it. What did you guys think about, had anybody heard of this before? No? I was wondering about that. You had before, Aaron? What's kind of your first impression or your reaction when you saw this? Like gut feelings and things. Just another day in the neighborhood, right? This is really cool, or I'm, a little bit of a nerd, which I own, but this is really cool. That there is, this thing here, and it's hard to read. It's also written in Latin too, so I don't think any of us here read Latin. But this is in a museum, and you can go look at it. And so, number 1 here, how is the Pilate inscription, specifically that mentions Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, how is the Pilate inscription relevant to the details of Jesus' life? And specifically, how is it relevant to his crucifixion?
Well, it's proof that he was in the Roman political world.
Yeah, he was there in that area of the world at that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and also that he had power because he's dedicating this to another guy. And
Oh, you're talking about Pilate. I thought you were talking about Jesus at first.
Oh no, I'm
Pilate.
Pilate.
Yeah.
Because it proves that Pilate existed in the world as a Roman in power, and
I completely understand.
Then we can see that even like that he was part of this before even Judea came on. So it's not like you can't say that he was in the Judean culture or anything like that, or got made up or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, you had a lot of information there. But yeah, I think you're right. There's this. It shows, and this is not. So a distinction that we should make that we made earlier. This rock being in existence does not prove that Pontius Pilate was a real person. It's another line of evidence because we already know from the historical record that he was real. And so this is supplementary to that. But yeah, it shows, wow, kind of tangible. I can look at it and feel it and all those things, that this man existed here in this time and place and he did these things. And it's not just something that's written on a page. And that's part of what it is. It's just another way about reconstructing the past. And so yeah, as far as I remember, I think his territory of being governor extended there. But it's just very interesting. What else did we think as far as how is this relevant to Jesus' life and specifically his crucifixion? I'm going to get some other takes on this too. Addie.
So Pilate was the one who, I guess, delivered Jesus to the Jews to be crucified. He had given them the option of crucifying Barabbas, and
Yeah.
they chose Jesus.
Yeah, this is the guy responsible for sending Jesus to get executed. And so another way to look at it is say if we had this rock, but we didn't have those quotations that we just looked at, this would still be evidence that Pilate was a real person. So it's just another way to go about it. But yeah, the man who delivered Jesus to be crucified was in fact in time and space a real person here.
I think the implications are that if you were writing the account of Jesus' false trial as a piece of fictional narrative, and then you start inserting actual political leaders of
Yeah.
that day into this piece of fiction work, it'd be very confusing if you're intending to present it as fiction. And it would be easily disproven if you're intending it to present it as a factual account.
Right.
So you take the risk either way. The more obvious answer is it's a real person who did real things and this is a real account. Because to make it a fake account with real people really calls attention to its falseness. And to make a piece of fiction, including real characters that don't fit in the context of the story, make it silly. So there's only kind of one way to reconcile all that.
Yeah, if you're going to make up a story, once you start naming names, then you kind of got your hands tied because you're either telling the truth or you're not. So once you start name dropping all of these people who are real, they themselves, I doubt Pilate cared anything about the Gospels or anything like that. But once you start naming those people, those who are aware of them or maybe knew them or were in the area would be like, what are you... Okay, Pilate was never governor of this area. Why'd you put that in this? But that's exactly kind of the point. If you're trying to make something up, you're not going to name names, is kind of what we're saying here. And so if some of these sort of, well, I'll call like incidental details are true in the story, then does that not also start building confidence into, okay, maybe this whole story is not totally false? Maybe there is some kind of truth and some evidence to this. If you're coming at it totally as a skeptic and you say, okay, these were real people, and what they're saying in these documents is corroborating with what these unbiased parties essentially are saying, and that starts to give some confidence about what we're talking about. Taylor.
I think it also helps that most archaeological finds are more recent, and the Bible came first.
Yeah.
So it's not the other way around. It's the archaeological finds are helping validate the Bible and names in the Bible. If it was the other way around, you would have skeptics that would say
Yeah, it does. And this is, like we've been saying, this is just shedding light on the thing, and it's allowing us to look at it from different perspectives of, yeah, there's all these confirmatory things. And as Taylor was talking about, if nobody ever discovered this, it wouldn't really change anything. It's just another piece of the puzzle that strengthens the whole story. If I recall correctly, and do not quote me on this, I think this was only discovered in something like the 80s or 90s, the 1900s, 80s, 90s. And so, this didn't all of a sudden make, oh, okay, yeah, the Bible is telling the truth. It just adds to the strength of the story there and shines light on it. Yeah, Andrew.
If this was already said, I'm sorry, because I was looking at some stuff in my notes too. But
That's right.
the fact that, this really doesn't mention or help with Jesus at all, really, all much. It doesn't make any mention of it. But it mentions Tiberius, and it links Pilate and Tiberius. So you have, in essence, we kind of now have three sources that have all independently linked these same characters together, which is kind of showing that they are preserving the details irrespective of each other.
Right.
And so it gives better credence to those details being accurate. And if it's accurate in those things of linking the correct Roman emperor, the time period, the region, and the prefect, Pilate, then it gives good credibility. Because we haven't talked about, is this a forgery? Is this something someone made or something? And I'm sure, one of the primary jobs of the archaeologist is to verify.
Yeah, did some guy in the 60s make this?
This is the style of stone that was of the time. This is the right materials. The inside of the letters is weathered the same amount that the outside is. So, all the things that they do to help verify that this wasn't made recently to try to be a proof after the fact.
Yeah, so I think you got on the kind of two things there. For one, yeah. Well, for, I guess, three things. I'm not an archaeologist, right? So I have to trust what these people are saying. And so they're, corroborating all this. But also another thing that Andrew's talking about, you have these different people saying all the same thing. We take it back to like a legal context, because we understand that in our modern day. If you have the same testimony from all these unconnected people, and they're all saying the same thing, that usually means what? True. The story's true. And usually they're a little different here and they're a little different there, but if you have people who are not connected all saying, yeah, this is the gist of what happened, then usually, case closed. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. The archaeology, the ancient sources, all of those things are just confirming what we already have here. And as we said before, the Bible is really the main source of information that we have about a lot of these things that we're talking about. But as we've said, we're trying to come at it as neutrally as possible and say, okay, what would everyone agree on, regardless if they believe in Jesus or if they even believe in God or not? Race.
The differences actually we were talking about, far from lending themselves to making us think that the story's probably not true, actually increase the credibility of the witnesses.
Yeah.
Detectives will tell you that if witnesses or people who are questioned have too many details in their stories that are identical,
Yep.
usually they've rehearsed it or collaborated in some way. We know these three didn't, simply because of who they were, and then this tablet adding to it, as Andrew said. But there are differences, and this is true with the Gospels too. There are a lot of the same accounts in the Gospels, but not every detail is the same. They're different because they come from different perspectives. Luke's is valuable to us in some ways because of these added details that are in there.
Yeah.
And he gives a lot of detail, not only historically, but geographically too. That's very valuable in establishing his credibility as a witness.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about some of that stuff later as well. Any questions before we move on to the next page? Okay, so let's look at page number 5, and this is our second thing we're talking about. Okay, Well, I forgot to put the color picture in there. And so you'll have to imagine, it's right here in my notes and it looks beautiful. And what it is it's the box on your page, the same color as this thing. So just imagine that. So they're both rocks. Can somebody tell me what is an ossuary? Because that's not a word we throw away around all the time, is it? A bone box. And so basically, this was Jewish custom in the day. You would lay out the body in a tomb, a family tomb usually, and once all the tissues and everything fell off and decayed, then you'd take those dry bones and you'd put them in a box. And usually it was like a family box. And so I think, for instance, in this one they found, I don't know, something like 6 individuals, something like that. But this was common, and during some of like the excavations in Jerusalem, and I think again this one was found maybe in the 90s or something to that effect, they start finding these, and it was a common practice. And this is not the only one that's been found, but it's obviously interesting for what we're talking about. So what makes this interesting is that inscribed with this box here, it reads Joseph, son of Caiaphas, or Kaifa. I don't speak Aramaic, so I can't translate that directly. But in Aramaic, it says this. And also in Josephus and some other places, the high priest at the time of Jesus' trial and execution was Joseph, son of Caiaphas, which they just refer to as Caiaphas at the time. And so this is interesting, and it's sort of frustrating because I've seen some accounts say this is absolutely 100% the guy, and then I've seen some say, well, the jury's still out, we're not exactly sure. And that's another case where I'm not an archaeologist, so I can't tell you 100% that this is the Caiaphas that put Jesus on trial and then sent him to the Romans. But it very well could be. And so that's huge. And with that cliffhanger, we will finish this up on Sunday. Any last questions? Andrew, you just have something to say? No? Okay. All right.